propose to come back to Teilhard de Chardin problematic and try to find how can here in the south of the Mediterranean Sea conceive these thoughts and from which point of view and from which the colonial thought can we introduce him. And I think that the problematic raised by Teilhard de Chardin in his 1955 work, Le Phénomène Humain, and which we are interested in here, and thus beyond the geosphere and the biosphere, is focusing on the noosphere and the Christic omega, omega point that unites all the conceptualized spheres. And this problematic is the following. To what extent and in what form does the human sphere still obey or escape the forces of cosmic convergence that gave birth to it? And this question, as posed, is directly related to what we now call ecology. However, if we exclude the dimension of non-human nature, Teilhard de Chardin perspective as that of a Christian priest is fundamentally religious. He is concerned with unity of spirit, the unity in Christ. This is, of course, a problem that resonates in philosophy, for example, with Spinoza, for example, the concept of pantheism, or Ibn Arabi, Wahdat al-Wujud, unity of being, and more generally in Sufi thought. It finds modern scientific expression in Freud's concept of the oceanic feeling, le sentiment océanique, discussed in his 1929 text, Civilization and Discontents, Malaise dans la civilisation. A sense of belonging to the universal. While Freud dissociates this idea from explicit religiosity, religion for Freud comes from childhood helplessness and the desire of the father, as you know. But Teilhard de Chardin focus remains tied to the spiritual. Returning to Teilhard de Chardin and the noosphere that gathers us here today, we need to consider how this singular conceptualization, which has been revisited in certain spheres of thought and politics in the West, may be relevant to the global South. And as you may imagine, I come from this tradition of critical science, informed by socialists and the colonial experience, from Marx to Frantz Fanon. That's why speaking about the colonial. When I mentioned the noosphere and by extension Teilhard de Chardin to my interlocutors, colleagues, that I will speak about Teilhard de Chardin, you can imagine the response, and the response is often predictable. Teilhard de Chardin's universalism is rejected as a vehicle for cosmic pan-Christianity, a reinvention of Christianity, but within its own scientific framework. And the questions raised typically run from critical of natural selection, form of Malthusianism, to the classical objections of the decolonial movement since Edward Said. What do we do with authors who fail to take into account the experiences of the global South, the lived realities of racialized and colonized people? But reading both the discourse surrounding the noosphere and Teilhard de Chardin himself, I find both validity and limitations of these critiques. To begin with the limitations, and in social science, the noosphere remains a concept under construction. Admittedly, it's rooted in European experience of humanization, or the word of hominisation, to take the word of Teilhard de Chardin. And when Teilhard de Chardin builds his theory on the human capacity to communicate and community which is morally evolved, by creating solidarities, for example, associations and humanitarianism, even the Christian mission, and even in the midst of the war, he overlooks the very mission of humanitarianism, even the Christian mission. when it comes to colonization and the relations between technologically advanced societies and colonized ones. Nevertheless, it's useful to reconsider this conceptualization through the lens of critical approaches on domination. And it's no coincidence that Léopold Sédar Senghor, for example, referred to Teilhard de Chardin's ideas to develop the concept of socialist negritude, highlighting the dissonance between Marxism and African realities. Senghor found in Teilhard de Chardin universalism and Christian humanism a path of resistance and salvation for black people facing with colonialization. Senghor writes, I quote him, "I admit it, Karl Marx didn't succeed in removing from us, the black elites, our distrust of intellect. He too often presented it to us as merely discursive, static, and abstract. Teilhard de Chardin, on the other hand, embodies it in the total matter and in the very dimensions of space-time. He makes it not only analytical but intuitive, truly dialectical." Fin de citation. But from a Fanonian perspective, and beyond Pan-Africanism and Panegritude, which gather Fanon and Senghor, that units Fanon and Senghor, the later, Senghor, is also seen by Fanon as man of maneuver in the pejorative sense of the term. The return to Teilhard de Chardin in the era of decolonization could then be perceived as a form of assimilation unless a serious critique of universalist theses is undertaken. In other words, there is a need to decolonize the noosphere in order to address the pressing issues facing societies in the Global South. So how can Teilhard de Chardin's ideas be relevant to the challenge of the South? Apart from the fact that, which is a reality, that Teilhard de Chardin served in a regiment of Moroccan tirailleurs during the First War, and apart from his extended stays in China, in South Africa, in Ethiopia, and other countries of the South, his relevance, I think, lies to two main aspects. The first one it concerns the weight of tradition and religion taken into account by Teilhard de Chardin. De Chardin's spiritualization of human condition resonates in both the Global South and North, where feeling, emotions, and religion as a sense of unity have played a crucial role in resisting domination, whether colonial or internal domination. The noosphere invites us to consider these elements as integral to human condition. It challenges static and state-centric thinking that focuses only on classes, bureaucracy, law, and order. And secondly, the unequal economic and political development between North and South, and for the noosphere to adequately address the domination that shaped the Global South, it must take into account the unequal development of the two global spheres, the North one and the South. And this inequality is not linked to the evolutionism or racist movement of thinking of 19th and 20th centuries, from social Darwinism to French Algiers School, for example, denounced by Frantz Fanon. Rather, it's linked to the monopolization of technology, a set of techniques and devices that extended slavery through colonialism and through colonialism, which extend slavery through colonialism and colonialism through the border. That's why, for me, the question of border here is fundamentally important. And this brings me to my current research, which is situated within the broader problematic of war and border studies. Specifically, I am conducting these ethnographic studies of the suffering experienced by societies in the South as a result of the political phenomenon of borderization, as an offense, the borderization as an aggression against the South, and the set of effective discourses of the borderization. This includes migrants who die in the deserts, in the Mediterranean Sea, in the Atlantic, or in the Balkan routes, driven by desperate desire to reach the West, only to be stopped by lethal mechanisms and the criminal migration policies conceived in the North, and dividing this world to the North and South. Effective division, and not only metaphoric. My research also focuses on this externalized border system that shifts the burden of managing by the violence the borders of the Western sphere to the global South, and the pain of families unable to identify and to mourn their lost relatives left into limbo by the new colonial policies coming from the North. Before we can discuss the resistance, which is effective in my fieldwork, and solidarities and agency of those who defy the borders of death, or even address the responsibilities of southern governments in negotiating a new agreement for freedom of movement with the North, Teilhard de Chardin reminds us that the noosphere he theorized is now divided in two, as with the division between colonized and colonizer blocks before 1960. We can say that since 1995, with the implementation of Schengen agreements, we have witnessed a new racialized division between Europe and Africa relationship, and perhaps analogous division elsewhere between Western and non-Western societies. And this division, rooted in increasingly explicit policies, splits the world through mechanisms used by northern states as instruments of hierarchization, benefiting some while diminishing others. And the division between populations that life is relevant and sacred, and population whose lives don't count in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Ukraine, in Syria, etc. At the heart of this machinery is the border. The border manifested in myriad of selective and sometimes exterminatory mechanisms. Visa, detention center, pushback, difficult or impossible access to residency cards and naturalizations, hotspots, border police, surveillance camera, barbed wire, prisons, walls, and the deadly violence inflicted on those who attempt to cross the dividing borderline. Therefore, and to conclude, the noosphere that Teilhard de Chardin proposed, like a concept attentive to human unity, must also address the concrete mechanisms that fragment and that threat this human unity. These mechanisms embedded in policies that perpetuate and exacerbate inequality between two geographical and human spheres pose a serious challenge to Teilhard de Chardin's dream of unified humanity, as theorized by a priest who was undoubtedly both scientist and humanist. Thank you.